In this video, we'll walk through the steps for conducting a one-way ANOVA in SPSS. We'll work from the hypothetical example of an experiment of a sight-singing method provided in the chapter Design and Analysis of Experimental Research 1. In this example, students are randomly assigned to one of three conditions: a control condition that receives typical sight-singing instruction, an experimental group that experiences a new method but with a burdensome amount of instruction and practice, and another experimental group that experiences the same new method but with a less burdensome amount of instruction and practice. The data for this example can be found in the file Miksza and Elpus sight-singing intervention-ANOVA. So we'll use the one-way ANOVA to examine whether sight-singing ability varies as a function of belonging to one of these groups. So to do that, we'll go to our Analyze menu, to Compare Means, to One-Way ANOVA. We'll enter the test score, our outcome variable, into the dependent list, and we'll enter group, the indicator of whether the participants were in the control group, the lightly burdened new method or the heavily burdened new method, into factor. And we could ask for descriptive statistics as well as a means plot to visualize the differences between the means. And click OK. So what we get is a summary of the descriptive statistics according to the participants in each group. So we see there are 50 people in the control group, 50 in the light burden group, 50 in the heavy burden group, the means, standard deviation, standard error of the means, as well as confidence intervals and minimum and maximum values. And then we get a fairly standard ANOVA table where we have our sum of squares, degrees of freedom, mean square, F statistic, and finally the significance value or the p-value. And what we're most interested in here is this top line, which represents the amount of variation that's explained by the grouping and whether that amount of variation is significant. And in this case, yes, it does seem to be a significant difference between these groups, since our value for our significance value is much lower than the threshold of 0.05. So we can reject the null hypothesis that there's no difference among these three groups on sight-singing ability. And if we're looking at our means plot, it looks like, well, there's quite a gap between the control group and the light burden group, as well as the control group and the heavy burden group. And also, what appears visually anyway, given with respect to the y-axis we have here, there appears to be a pretty large gap between the light burden and the heavy burden groups. So although we found a significant effect, it is still not exactly clear which groups differ from which. We only know that there is some difference among these groups. So we now need to run a post-hoc test to determine which groups differ significantly from each other. And to do that, we'll declutter here for a moment, go back to Analyze and Compare Means and One-Way ANOVA, and click on the post-hoc option here. And following our chapter example, we'll use the 2-key option for honestly significant differences, which is a great name for a post-hoc test, which will allow us to compare every possible pairing of these three different groups. So we click Continue and rerun our analysis now. And you'll see, again, we have our summary statistics, our ANOVA table with the same result, but now we have some extra information before our plot appears. And we can interpret this box up here in particular to get a really clear sense of the differences between the groups. When comparing the control group to the lightly burdened group, you see a significant difference. When comparing the control group to the heavily burdened group, you see a significant difference. And then when comparing the lightly burdened group to the heavily burdened group, you do not see a significant difference. This is not meeting the threshold of 0.05. So what that allows us to do is interpret our mean plots with a little bit more precision. So not only can we say that, yes, these groups are significantly different from each other, but more specifically, we know that the lightly burdened group scored higher in sight-singing in a significant manner than the control group. The heavily burdened group scored significantly higher in sight-singing than the control group, but there is no significant difference between the performance of the lightly burdened and heavily burdened experimental groups. And that's running a simple one-way ANOVA with a post-hoc test option in SPSS. Thank you very much.